Tyler, and welcome to Context for Kids, episode 26, Tazria and Metzora. It's Leviticus 12:1 to 15:33. And I'm combining them because they're almost exactly the same for some really important reasons. Namely, the way that the ancient world regarded natural body functions and diseases and mold. Now, the ancient world, they had kind of a funny way of looking at it that God really had to strip from his people before they could go in and possess the land and be stripped of their superstitions. So, the ancient world was unscientific, and that is not a bad thing. You know, a common misconception about unscientific cultures is that they're somehow uneducated or backwards or stupid. But you know, nothing could be farther from the truth, and I've talked to you before how the ancient Egyptians and the people all over the ancient world, they were brilliant engineers and mathematicians. They even developed medicines, and they did have a rudimentary knowledge of how many things worked. In some cases, they had knowledge that we don't have anymore. They figured out how to make the pyramids, and we can't even figure out how. So these were brilliant people. What they lacked was scientific knowledge. Now, scientific knowledge, well, it takes time to develop. You start out here. Well, it's like you've taken science in school, haven't you? Don't you know more than when you were a kindergartner? Well, the same thing goes with learning about science or archaeology or anything that you learn. People start out with this level of knowledge, then somebody really smart will come out and he or she'll make a leap. Someone like Isaac Newton or Mary Curie, and then somebody else will add, and you get your Albert Einsteins and Stephen Hawkings, and you'll get more and more information. All of a sudden, you have a very scientific society. Well, we aren't scientific because we figured out all that stuff. We're scientific because 6,000 years worth of people figured out that stuff. But in the old days, things were different in the ancient Near East. Now, here's the interesting thing. Our obsession with science really only began about 500 years ago. Before then, it was only the rare individual who devoted their life to even caring about the whys of the natural world. People were concerned with survival. People who are concerned with survival are people who are going to be working all the time. They're not necessarily going to be paying attention to the whys about everything, the minutia of detail that scientists around the world have looked at, because now we have things like plenty of money, plenty of food, and a lot of time on our hands, because we don't have to do things like wash our clothes by hand, and we don't have to cut firewood every day just to be able to cook. That has given our society a real advantage, and we're able to spend a lot of time and a lot of resources studying things that would have had to have gone to survival a long time ago. So you see, it isn't a matter about intelligence, it's a matter of, well, science is a luxury. So, now, God composed the Bible to a people who were spiritual, not scientific. It was not his goal to write a science book, because writing a science book to people who were simply trying to survive every year, who needed the rains to come in so they'd be able to eat this year, and they needed the rains to be able to come in next year so they'd be able to eat next year. They needed famine not to happen. They had immediate needs. So he wrote a book to them. It was a book that revealed his character and his plans through the history of his people. It was a book meant to show people what kind of God he was, as opposed to all the false gods of the nations, but it also was a book to tell people how to love one another and how to relate to each other. You know, sometimes in the modern world, we've decided that if something isn't scientific, that it's not valid. But who decided that and when? You know, when you look at all the thousands of years we've been on the earth, 500 years isn't very long. And really, it wasn't even all that. 500 years ago was only when it kind of sort of got started. Really, until the age of reason about 300 years ago, it wasn't even important. We changed the culture, And we decided that the Bible needed to fit into our changes. But it doesn't. The Bible's perfect. The Bible is perfect for what it was designed to do, because nothing is more important than understanding God, His character, and the way we're supposed to love each other. The two greatest commandments are, we should love the Lord our God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength. And we should love our neighbor as ourselves. That's what the Bible's about. All right, so, like I said, when the Age of Reason happened, we decided that if the Bible wasn't a science book, that it wasn't valid, so we changed its purpose. And we tried to make it a science book. But that caused problems, because people in the ancient world really did believe that they thought with their heart. Is that a big, hairy deal? Not really. Does it matter to God's plans, and does it matter to our developing God's character and loving one another, whether we think with our heart or our brain? No, of course not. That's important to us because we're interested with how things work. People of the Bible were interested in something more important. They were interested in community and how things are, not how they work. So, hope that makes sense. Now, this week's Torah portions, because we're doing 2, Leviticus, and especially these 4 chapters, were written to people who had been surrounded by Egyptian superstition for hundreds of years. And Egyptian superstitions tried to explain disease and natural body functions by using demons. And so things that were perfectly natural became a cause for shunning and judgment, when really it's just kind of stuff that happens. Now, like I said, Egyptians were really intelligent, and they had many legitimate medical treatments, which they mixed with magic. Now, they had cures for blindness. The cure for blindness, I think the cure is worse than the, let's see, I have this one. So the cure for blindness, I'll just tell you, but I have to read the cure for the common cold. So the cure for blindness was to suck the goo out of a pig's eyeball and to smear it on the eyeball. You know what? No. I want to stay as far away from pig eyeball goo as I can. You know, I just messed up. Oh, if you like my shirt this weekend, I wanted to explain, just in case anyone doesn't get it, here's Darth Tater, and this is Luke Frywalker. I loved this shirt when I saw it. And that's actually the #1 comment I get from people who contact me. We love your shirts. Where do you get your shirts? And we're always looking forward to seeing what shirts you're wearing. Well, the shirt gravy train has run out because I'm wearing my son's hand-me-down. And now they're wearing a men's medium, which looks on me like a circus tent, because don't tell anybody, but I'm like less than 5'1". I'm this little shrimpy person. I even have this TV almost at the floor. Just so you know, I look tall. So, shh, don't tell anybody. You're probably, most of you, taller than me, or you will be before long. Okay. I try to make up for it by being just drop-dead gorgeous and intelligent. Or not. Okay, so anyway, that was the cure for blindness. Now here we go. Exorcism of a cold. This was actually from a real spell text. And they were supposed to say, cold, the son of a cold, who breaks bones, throws down the skull, who hacks in the bone marrow, and who places illness in the 7 holes of the head. I guess 7 holes of the head. I guess must have been talking about the skull, because we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And you know, and when you got a cold, all of those feel really horrible, and they probably said, you know, recite this spell and you'll be all better in 2 weeks, right? And they had these spell books. I got to tell you this one really funny one. And this is from one of my favorite books. I've told you about this one before, The Ancient Gods Speak, by Donald B. Redford. And it's a summary of an encyclopedia set that he did that I would love to have one of these days. Anyway, I like it because it wasn't written by a believer who was writing something about the Bible, so I can read that book and no one's telling me how to relate it to the Bible. I can say, oh, look at that. Sometimes that's useful to just get an objective viewpoint on things. And he compiled a book using all the experts on ancient Egypt from all over the world in their individual fields of study. So I get the information that these people have worked for all their lives. So that's why I really like that. But I have another book I'm going to share with you later. So if you guys want to start studying this stuff, which I hope you do. So anyway, the common cold. Oh, and I was going to tell you about the spell text. There was an advertisement in it for one of the medical spells, and it said that it has been used with satisfaction millions of times. Egyptian commercials. Isn't that wild? Nothing ever changes. See, what did Solomon say? There is nothing new under the sun. I guess he was right. All right. So, Leviticus, though, these 4 chapters sound nothing like an Egyptian healing manual. Because these 4 chapters in Genesis don't talk about cures and healing at all. These 4 chapters are not about spells and exorcisms. Okay? They're about diagnosis and purification. How do you diagnose a skin disease? What do you do when somebody has a skin disease? It wasn't about cures, it was about separating them from the camp. Okay? If they had a disease. And it was about diagnosing them to how can you tell when it's gone and what do they have to do to purify themselves so they can come to the tabernacle again. But there's no healing rituals. There's no spells, no incantation. Now, talk about pagan ways versus God's ways. Now, all through Mesopotamia and Egypt, diseases were blamed on demons. Okay? And one of the interesting things I read I read it again this week, was that the Egyptians believed that demons, there were 4 different kinds of demons, and demons weren't the same to them as we think of. Demons weren't necessarily evil in Egyptian mythology. They were just minor deities. There were 4 different kinds. There were fighting demons. Those you don't want to go to. There were emissary demons. There were messenger demons, and can't remember what the other kind was. But the emissary ones were like guardian angels. Okay? Demons had a protective, defensive role. So they would be protecting people, and then they get aggressive if somebody attacked. And there were demons, there were fate demons who followed you all your life, but they weren't always able to protect you from, malevolent demons. Okay? So, going back to here, we see that all throughout Mesopotamia, diseases were blamed on demons, major deities. Of course, major deities would be like the big gods. Demons were just the minor household, whatever gods. Or angry ancestors. Oh, I didn't tell you about the demons. This is interesting because we find something similar in the New Testament. They believed that fighting demons traveled in groups of 7. Now ask your parents about 7 demons and maybe they can read you something really interesting from the New Testament. So, angry ancestors. We're going to talk about angry ancestors later. So, in Israel, skin diseases and mold were not treated with any sort of sin sacrifice or repentance, or the need for repentance, or incantations and spells, which is very, very different from Egypt, where they were treating them with exorcisms, or, they would go to a priest. The priest would actually perform a spell to get rid of the demonic influences. But with Israel, these were not treated like the person had even done anything wrong. We don't see that they give any sin sacrifice. We see the purification sacrifices that we talked about a few weeks ago in the video on what sacrifices were really about, for the purification of the altar, for the forgiveness of sins off of the altar so that God's house was kept clean. Those are the sacrifices that we see. All right. Now, demonic omens. Now, you've seen mold. You know, you got blue mold on bread. Maybe you've had black mold in your house. One of the problems that I've had in different houses when I've lived in really, really wet areas, well, you see this in the shower. You ever seen orange mold? Orange mold is talked about in these Leviticus chapters. The orange mold, there was an orange mold and I think a greenish mold. I don't think I've ever seen a greenish mold. So maybe that's just something they have over in the Middle East, and Near East, I don't know. So anyway, but mold, and this is all over the world, it's common in places where they have a heavy rainy season where things don't get all the way dried out. Canaan had incredibly heavy rains in the fall. It was called latter rains. They had the early rains in the spring, the latter rains in the fall. They were very important for the agriculturals, but they also would be causing mold, and it's very possible that the Egyptians didn't have this problem because I didn't see it pop up in the literature. Okay? It's much drier in Egypt. They got their irrigation from the Nile. Otherwise, it was a drier, more arid place. They may not have had problems with this kind of mold. So the Israelites would be going into a place where they see mold. They say, oh my gosh, you know, there's mold. It's a demonic infestation in my house. Because that's the way it was taught. And the people with the demonic infestation of their house were believed to be being stalked and hunted by their angry ancestors who wanted them dead for whatever reason. And we'll talk about some of the reasons later, because we see that actually in a modern day observance that we can find even here in the United States. So, God showed them how to deal with dangerous mold spore infections without shunning, without magic spells, without anything. He showed them how to deal with it. He showed them how to wash it out or tear it out if it wouldn't go away, how to burn what was molded, and how to preserve what wasn't. Not a big, hairy deal. Now, he's not teaching them science in these chapters, but you can see the science behind them. Natural body functions, viral diseases, mold, which is, I think it's bacteria, and natural things, not demons. So, he was giving them a leg up on the rest of the world by showing them that superstition doesn't fall into things which are just facts of life. All right, so I was telling you about where we see this in the world today. My sons and I are reading a book, and whether you guys homeschool or not, boy, you know, some of the best reading I've ever done has been about great heroes of the faith. Jewish heroes, Christian heroes, just people who have served God greatly. A couple of years ago, my dear friend Dr. Dina Dye, she introduced me to Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and it changed everything for me. He was a Lutheran minister who was living in Nazi Germany, and he had some very difficult decisions to make, and I highly recommend learning about him. Corrie ten Boom. I believe she was either Austrian or from Holland, and her Christian family hid Jews during the Holocaust. Another amazing story. Her book's called The Hiding Place. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer has different books called The Cost of Discipleship, and just wow. But this one is written about a man named Cameron Townsend, called Good News in Every Language, and he was the person who started the Wycliffe Bible Translation Project. And by his death, the Bible had been translated into 500 languages in the world, just from his organization. He had gone into Guatemala when in 1917 as a missionary, and he found these Cochical Indians. I hope I said that right. And he tried to hand out a gospel tract to them. He says, why would I want to worship a God who doesn't even speak my language? Well, that's a really good point. They had this language and it wasn't even written down. They could all speak it. Well, he developed a written language and then he translated the Bible into their language. And then based on his work, they did it worldwide with 500 different languages. Wow, and they're still going. That was just in 1972, it was 500 languages. So anyway, one of the things in his book, I kind of got off the track, didn't I? So one of the things in his book was he was shocked when he went down into Guatemala. And now the Guatemalan natives, the Indians, the native population, they had been forcibly converted by the Catholics in, I think, 1543. And so they were forced into Catholicism, but they kept their own traditions. And one of the traditions they kept was, I think it's Dios de, no, it's Day of the Dead. I can't remember how to say it in Spanish. It's called Day of the Dead. And he was shocked when he walks into this village and he sees people putting down bottles of liquor, cakes, choice foods in the cemetery. And he says, dude, that is seriously messed up. What is going on? And his guide explained to him, well, they believe that if they don't do that on this day every year, because this is the day of the year, November 1st, that their dead ancestors come to life, and if they don't placate them, if they don't mollify them, if they don't make them happy, they're going to hunt them down and kill them. And that was Guatemala. We see it in Mexico. We see it in South America today. Well, in Egypt, they had something similar. In Egypt, we actually have copies of letters that were written to dead ancestors saying, why don't you leave us alone? What did we do? It's a very common thing around the world. Okay, so I hope I made that make a little more sense to you. God, all through, ever since the Exodus, God has been dealing with the Israelites. He's been trying to un-Egyptify them. He says, guys, the Egyptians were messed up. They had some real things going for them as far as engineering, and they were really smart, but dang, their religion is messed up. You need to come out of it. You need to learn that not everything is the way they see it. Not everything is the way the world's been seeing it. The world wanted to blame everything on demons. God wanted to show them sometimes things just happen. And sometimes we can even need purification when good things happen. So, that is this week's teaching, and I get this question a lot from parents saying, I want to start studying this. What's the best book to start out with? Well, the best author to start out with is a man named John H. Walton, and I think myself and all the people that I study with, we all started out with John H. Walton's, I didn't write it here, The Ancient Near East, and the Ancient Near Eastern Thought in the Old Testament. A great book. It's a great overview. The first chapter is kind of difficult, so you may want to skip it till you've done the rest, then go back. It's where I learned about ecstaspasy. Remember ecstaspasy? But if you want just a general, overall book that will take you through verse by verse in the scripture and tell you some of the context that we have, John Walton, the IVP, Bible Background Commentary, Old Testament. It's a very reasonably priced book. They have another one for the New Testament by a guy named Gene Keener. Yeah, Gene Keener. And that's also good if you want a more expensive option. Then there is something called the Zondervan has an illustrated Bible background commentaries. It's much more in-depth. I've got the set for the New Testament, and I'm waiting the Old Testament set's big, huge, grotesquely expensive, but worth it. It's on back order. So if you are interested in starting to look at this stuff yourself, if you're every week you're going, I wish she'd covered that, well, this is a chance for you to start looking it up for yourself. because you shouldn't have to rely on me. I'm just here as a resource. I want you to study this stuff. I want you to learn. I want you to be excited about this. And I don't want you to think that I get my information from mysterious sources. That's the book that I started out with. Now I read, oh my gosh, I've got so many books, but they're no secret. And you know what? If you ever have something you want to ask me, of course I have my email address. You can contact me and say, Tyler, Miss Tyler, I want, of course you're a grown-up, you don't have to call me that. Tyler, I want to learn about X. What? Point me in the right direction, and I will. Absolutely I will. So, anyway, that is this week's Torah portion, and oh, next week on April 17th, I'm going to be in West Monroe, Louisiana. Conference got canceled last month because of flooding, but from 1 to 7 p.m. at the West Monroe Convention Center in Louisiana. And I will be teaching school-aged kids and anyone who wants to learn. And then my temple teacher, Joseph Good, will be teaching about Kedusha, about holiness. Now, I taught about it a little bit a few weeks ago, but he is really going to teach about it. He is my teacher. And I hope that you will all take advantage of it, because it's a great opportunity. So, that's it for this week. I love you. I'm praying for you. And I hope that you have a great week studying the Scriptures together. See you next week.